What if, in a single night, the very laws of war were rewritten, and the world only realized it when catastrophe was already unfolding? Picture this. In the south of Ukraine, a relentless escalation shattered a fragile peace. Cities that had grown used to uneasy nights found themselves thrust into chaos as sirens howled and distant fires flickered on the horizon, announcing a wave of attacks that would reverberate across the entire region. Yet, the upheaval was not isolated to the front lines. In Kyiv, the very nerve center of Ukrainian defense, a political and military earthquake rattled the halls of power. Before dawn's first light, several top commanders were removed from their posts, their replacements ushered in with little warning. The very backbone of Ukraine's resistance was thrown into uncertainty, as if the entire nation was holding its breath, waiting for the next blow. Meanwhile, just across the border, Russia unveiled weapons the world had only speculated about. These were not mere prototypes or symbols. They were tools of real destruction. One could think of the first use of tanks in World War I, or the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. Moments when the nature of warfare itself shifted in a matter of hours, leaving both enemies and allies scrambling to understand the new rules. This was such a moment. The introduction of next-generation precision-guided missiles, electronic jamming systems, and swarm drones created a battlefield where old doctrines were rendered obsolete. As news spread, NATO allies leapt into action. Emergency meetings stretched long into the night in both Brussels and Washington, echoing the urgency of the Cuban Missile Crisis or the early days of the Gulf War, when the world's most powerful leaders were forced to reconsider their strategies on the fly. This time, however, the tempo was even faster. Information flowed in torrents, with real-time updates and satellite imagery painting a picture of chaos that seemed to evolve by the minute. All the while, a fog of confusion and doubt hung over the proceedings. Trusted strategies that had served nations for generations suddenly failed. The familiar playbooks of deterrence and containment were cast aside, and seasoned diplomats and generals found themselves searching for answers in the dark. The lesson is clear and urgent. Those who cling too tightly to stability risk being swept away by realities that move faster than any bureaucracy or doctrine. The collapse of old rules is not a distant specter. It is happening now, with consequences that could cascade across continents, affecting millions of lives in ways both immediate and profound. But how did everything come apart so quickly? To grasp this chain reaction, let us follow its unfolding hour by hour. Kyiv awoke beneath an uneasy silence, punctuated by the shrill wail of sirens, a city suspended in dread. Imagine the morning of September 11th, 2001, in New York City, or the first hours of Operation Barbarossa in 1941, when entire populations sensed, with chilling clarity, that life would never be the same again. The very air seemed charged with foreboding, as if the world itself was holding its breath. For hours, the capital endured a relentless barrage of air raid alarms. The echoes bounced off deserted avenues and behind shuttered windows. The usual bustle of a city accustomed to tension had vanished, leaving behind a surreal stillness, broken only by the distant rumble of explosions and the hurried footsteps of civilians seeking refuge underground. In the south, the situation was even more dire. Cities such as Mykolaiv, Kryvyi Rih, and Zaporizhzhia came under attack within minutes of each other, reminiscent of the Blitz in London during World War II, when entire neighborhoods would be targeted in coordinated waves. This was not random violence. Russian forces deployed a meticulously planned assault, using swarms of drones to map the battlefield in real time. Artillery and missiles followed, striking with a precision that left defenders little time to react. These strikes targeted Ukraine's vital infrastructure. Logistics hubs, command posts, and crucial communication links were hit almost simultaneously. Defenders scrambled, but the speed and coordination of the offensive left gaps that could not be easily filled. To illustrate, think of the German blitzkrieg tactics in 1939 Poland and 1940 France, where the rapid movement of armored units and air power paralyzed defenders and shattered their ability to respond coherently. Images from the night told a stark story. Empty streets, flickering street lamps, and abandoned vehicles painted a picture of a city on edge. Civilians, their faces etched with fatigue and fear, huddled in subways and cellars, clutching their phones for updates. First responders braved the darkness, extinguishing fires and tending to the wounded, embodying the resilience seen in war-torn cities throughout history, from Sarajevo to Aleppo. The emotional toll was unmistakable. Months of tension had prepared many for hardship, but this escalation threatened the very foundation of daily life. Conversations shrank to whispers. Even the most stoic citizens seemed haunted by the uncertainty of what might come next. There is a grave danger in underestimating such moments. Each hour spent paralyzed, every lapse in coordination, saps morale and erodes the defender's ability to adapt. History offers many examples. During the Battle of France in 1940, the delay in issuing counter-orders allowed German forces to encircle French armies. In modern warfare, speed and adaptation are everything. Yet the battlefield was only the first tremor. The real shockwave was building deep within command centers, where decisions made in the next hours would shape not only the outcome of this battle, but the fate of the region itself. As dawn neared, Ukraine's leadership faced a race against time. Long-standing alliances and strategies were suddenly at risk. The rules of engagement were shifting faster than anyone had foreseen. When leadership falters and logistics unravel, every second becomes a battleground. This principle is as old as war itself, echoed in the ancient Chinese text, The Art of War. Speed is the essence of war. Take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness. Travel by unexpected routes and strike him where he has taken no precautions. In the gray hours before sunrise, the violence in southern Ukraine reached levels unseen in many months. Russian forces launched a barrage more intense than any previous assault, with explosions rolling across multiple sectors. Residents described windows rattling and the ground shaking, as if the city itself was trembling under the weight of history. This was not a random bombardment. Each strike was meticulously calculated, targeting logistics hubs, highways, ammunition depots, command centers, and the nerve centers of drone and communications networks. Within minutes, the flow of supplies and orders was cut off. Ukrainian officials confirmed that key command posts were thrown into disarray, and emergency crews battled to contain the damage and save lives. Ukraine's air defenses, normally among the sharpest in Europe, were initially caught off guard. Teams scrambled to respond, but valuable minutes slipped away. By the time defenses activated, the main wave had already inflicted significant damage, echoing the surprise attacks that have reshaped wars, from Pearl Harbor in 1941 to the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Russian ground units exploited these openings. Forward units advanced, consolidating their positions and using the confusion to their advantage. Real-time maps became obsolete within hours, as front lines redrew faster than experts could brief the public. Each report shifted the narrative, fueling fears of a larger breakthrough. But the shock was not limited to the battlefield. In Kyiv, crisis became personal. Before sunrise, military leaders were summoned to the Ministry of Defense's underground command. In a few short hours, several top commanders, including the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Head of Logistics, were suspended or replaced. Files changed hands. New faces appeared in shadowed corridors. The entire defense apparatus pivoted into emergency mode, with trust and authority suddenly in flux. Pressure mounted from all sides. Rumors of mistakes and possible leaks spread quickly, amplified by social media. Morale wavered as units struggled with new orders and unfamiliar leaders. The stakes were painfully clear. Hesitation could lead to disaster, not just on the front lines, but throughout the nation. Meanwhile, Moscow seized control of the narrative. Kremlin spokespeople claimed their strikes were necessary for stability, while Russian media boasted of crippling Ukrainian defenses. Official briefings portrayed Ukraine's lines as collapsing, suggesting the psychological war was as vital as the physical one. The result was a systemic shock, a demonstration of how modern wars can shift when leadership, logistics, and information are all under attack. The old playbook was obsolete. Delays and errors now carried risks that rippled far beyond any single battlefield, threatening alliances and the region's stability. As the crisis deepened, Ukraine's allies faced mounting pressure. Decisions made in these hours would determine not only the outcome of this battle, but the trajectory of the entire conflict. When a single front collapses, the entire map dissolves into uncertainty. The shockwaves from southern Ukraine spread quickly. Moscow issued stern warnings, stating that any counterattack would provoke a forceful and potentially devastating response. Russian officials highlighted new weapons, boasting of technological leaps and improved accuracy. This show of force was reminiscent of the missile parades in Red Square during the Cold War, designed as much to intimidate as to inform. In Western capitals, alarms rang out. Leaders in NATO and the European Union convened emergency summits, forced to confront the reality that their strategies were now dangerously outdated. Headlines called this a watershed moment, an inflection point akin to the fall of the Berlin Wall or the invasion of Iraq in 2003, when the world's assumptions about conflict were upended overnight. On the ground, Ukrainian defenders faced mounting pressure. Supply lines that once seemed secure were now compromised. Trucks and trains rerouted onto exposed roads, every mile threatened by missile strikes and electronic jamming. Repair crews worked around the clock, but the logistical strain grew heavier with each passing hour. Allied governments responded with urgency. Advanced air defenses and electronic warfare systems were rushed to the front. However, the pace of escalation outstripped even the most efficient bureaucracies. Some shipments were delayed, others intercepted. Vulnerabilities multiplied as the enemy adapted and struck at new targets. This recalls the logistical nightmares of the Eastern Front in World War II, where entire armies were lost not to battle, but to stretched supply lines and winter's unforgiving grip. Diplomacy across Europe and the Caucasus turned frantic. Some allies pushed for escalation, more aid, harsher sanctions, while others urged restraint, fearing that a single misstep could drag more nations into the conflict. The unity of alliances was tested, as happened during the Suez Crisis of 1956, when diverging priorities led to a fracturing of Western resolve. Military analysts warned that every miscalculation now carried exponential risks. A single missed message, a false alarm, even a stray missile could widen the war. The logic of gradual escalation was shattered, replaced by a volatile reality where speed and information mattered as much as firepower. If key players could not adapt, the conflict threatened to spiral outward, destabilizing entire regions and placing millions at risk. Predictability, once a source of comfort, had become a weapon, and its absence was now a force on the battlefield. Yet amid this maelstrom of technology and information, it was not only machines and doctrines that would decide the outcome. Human resilience, ingenuity, and the will to improvise under pressure could prove the decisive factor. Think of the Warsaw Uprising, the Battle of Stalingrad, or the citizen resistance in besieged cities throughout history, where ordinary people turned the tide through courage and adaptability. As both sides raced to recalibrate, a single misstep could mean the difference between containment and catastrophe. The world watched, holding its breath for the next move. In a war where the landscape, both literal and metaphorical, can change overnight, what truly keeps armies, and people, from succumbing to chaos? When the ground shifts, survival depends less on sweeping strategies and more on the courage to improvise. Volunteers, local officials, and ordinary citizens must adapt rapidly, rerouting supplies, inventing new ways to communicate, and supporting each other in real time, often without clear guidance. Consider the Dunkirk evacuation in World War II, where civilian boats rescued hundreds of thousands of troops under fire, or the resourcefulness of civilians in Leningrad during the siege, who found ways to survive months without adequate food or heat. But this constant adaptation comes at a cost. As leadership changes and orders shift by the hour, uncertainty spreads. Morale can become brittle, and trust may need to shift from distant authorities to immediate leaders and neighbors. In such times, Decentralized networks, small units, municipal leaders, tech-savvy volunteers become vital. When top-down communication falters, resilience depends on empowering people at every level to make quick, informed decisions. The old models of security, designed for slower, more predictable conflicts, cannot keep up. Success now demands speed, flexibility, and the ability to turn setbacks into new plans before the enemy can respond. Coordination across fast-moving fronts becomes essential, and rigid hierarchies give way to networks of trust and initiative. This is seen not only in Ukraine, but in recent conflicts from Syria to Nagorno-Karabakh, where smaller, more agile forces have often outmaneuvered larger, more traditional armies. Even with the most advanced technology, there is a trap. Tools and tactics can lag behind real-world events. By the time a new device or method is fielded, the battlefield may already have shifted. This is the paradox of modern war. Even the side with the advantage can find itself on unstable ground, unable to rest on any success for long. Clinging to old playbooks is no longer just risky. It undermines the very ability to lead and survive. The stakes are higher than ever, and the margin for error shrinks with every passing hour. The escalation in southern Ukraine has exposed the cracks in established systems, forcing everyone to rethink what it truly takes to endure and prevail. The next moves will not only decide the outcome of this battle, they could define the fate of the region for years to come. The next shock could arrive at any moment. The question is, will you adapt quickly enough, or be left scrambling to catch up? What is unfolding in southern Ukraine is not just a headline, but a glaring warning. The era of predictable wars is fading. Old frameworks for military action, diplomacy, and even public opinion are being left behind by a world where seconds matter and information outpaces even the fastest missile. Clinging to outdated logic is a recipe for disaster. Logistical failures, splintered alliances, and sudden power shifts are no longer rare. They are becoming the norm. The edge now goes to those who harness technology, outmaneuver misinformation, and pivot faster than rivals can even react. Ignore these lessons, and you risk missing the next crucial turning point, not just as a strategist, but as a citizen. When the rules change in real time, hesitation can cost lives, erase influence, or trade lasting security for fleeting calm. So, what can be done? What practical steps must leaders and ordinary people take to survive and shape the future in this new era? First, invest in flexibility. Military and civilian organizations must train not only for known threats, but for the unknown. Red team exercises, scenario planning, and rapid prototyping of new technologies should become routine. During the Cold War, NATO regularly held large-scale exercises to test its readiness for surprise attacks. Today, these drills must evolve to include cyber threats, information warfare, and the challenges of hybrid conflict. Second, empower decentralized decision-making. Trusting local leaders and frontline units with greater autonomy enables faster responses. The Israeli Defense Forces, for instance, have long relied on the principle of mission command, empowering officers at every level to adapt and innovate. This approach should be adopted more widely, not only in militaries, but also in government agencies and civil society organizations. Third, strengthen alliances through transparency and shared intelligence. In times of uncertainty, the temptation is to withhold information. But history shows that alliances survive crises when partners share both risks and knowledge. The success of the Allies in World War II owed much to the pooling of intelligence, such as the breaking of the Enigma Code, and the willingness to adapt strategies together. Fourth, foster a culture of resilience at every level. This means investing in education, critical thinking, and community networks that can withstand shocks. In Finland, for example, the concept of sisu, a unique blend of determination and resilience, helped the nation endure the Winter War against the Soviet Union. Today, resilience must extend to digital infrastructure, local supply chains, and the ability to combat disinformation. Fifth, anticipate the unexpected. leaders should regularly challenge their own assumptions and invite dissenting views. This is not just about being open-minded, it is about survival. The failure to anticipate Pearl Harbor, the fall of France, or the collapse of the Soviet Union all stemmed in part from complacency and groupthink. Finally, remember the human factor. No technology, no matter how advanced, can replace the courage, creativity, and solidarity of people facing adversity together. From the citizens of London in the Blitz to the volunteer networks in Ukraine today, history shows that the will to endure and adapt is the ultimate defense. This is your call to vigilance. Question easy narratives. Anticipate the next move before events force your hand. Only those who truly grasp the urgency and act with resolve will be prepared for whatever comes next. The world is changing faster than ever. The next chapter is being written now. The only question is, will you be ready?